Today, we're going to discuss the main principles of medical authorship integrity. So, defining authorship, or in simpler terms, who qualifies as an author. The landscape of publishing is really shifting these days, so especially with the increasing global research and, of course, the use of artificial intelligence or AI. That's why we are going to discuss the latest updates to the ICMJE recommendations, which are the recommendations of the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. This presentation is a guide to correctly define roles, understanding our responsibilities as authors, and how to integrate AI in an ethical way into our workflows. Most researchers think of authorship in terms of the credit that it holds. However, this brings academic reward. So everybody knows that authorship brings academic rewards, elevates our position in the scientific community, and can lead to financial gain through grants or promotions. However, the ICMJE highlights that authorship is a dual-sided coin. To claim the credit as an author or a contributor, you must accept the responsibility that comes with it. This means taking full accountability for the published work and maintaining ownership of its scientific integrity. You simply cannot have one without the other. So, to be credited as an author, an individual must meet what we call the 4 pillars of authorship. The rule here is absolute. An author must meet all 4 criteria. And the 4 criteria are: 1, to have a substantial contribution in the research; 2, to take part in drafting or reviewing the work; 3, you must share in the final approval; and 4, you should have an accountability agreement. So, meeting only 1, 2, or even 3 of these criteria disqualifies an individual from authorship. So let's break these down one by one. So the first criterion is substantial intellectual contribution. The first pillar is the basic criteria to be included as an author in any study. A substantial contribution is very important. An individual must contribute to the conception or design of the work, or they can contribute to the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data. As you can see on the right side of this slide, some examples of criteria or contributions do not cross the threshold for authorship. For example, providing general supervision of a research group is not considered authorship. Securing the funding for the research or lab does not cross the threshold for authorship. And another example is performing simple data collection also could not lead to the status of an author. Therefore, these examples or providing resources only do not qualify for authorship. Going to criteria 2 and 3, which are drafting and approval. Pillars 2 and 3 require that the individual either drafted the work or critically reviewed it. And then they provided final sign-off on the version to be published. It's critical to highlight what the ICMJE calls the opportunity rule. So anyone who meets the first criterion, which is the intellectual contribution, must be given the opportunity to participate in drafting and final approval. And as lead authors, you cannot use criteria 2 and 3 as a loophole to disqualify some members or colleagues who did the heavy work early on in the project. Going to the last criterion, which is the integrity pact. So the final pillar is the integrity pact, which is by agreeing to be an author, you are agreeing to be accountable for all aspects of the work, not only your part. This means that you agree to help investigate and resolve any questions related to the accuracy or integrity of the paper. You aren't expected to have personally performed every experiment in the study or research. However, you must be able to identify which specific co-authors were responsible for the other works of other parts of the work. And you must have absolute confidence in their integrity, of course. Now, coming to a topic that we are frequently asked about, which is who should be the corresponding author. So every paper requires a corresponding author, and this is really a huge responsibility. The corresponding author is mainly responsible for communication. So communication during the submission, communication during the peer reviewing process, addressing reviewer and editor comments, and even after publication, they are responsible for the post-publication process. So the corresponding author acts as the central hub on behalf of all authors. And corresponding authors should have the ability to communicate properly with the journal editor, respond to any data requests, have the ethics committee approval forms ready, and ensure that all co-authors have completed their disclosures. So, by all means, the corresponding author should be alert, they should be responsive, and they should be knowledgeable of both the research and the publication process. So as a corresponding author, you can delegate some of your tasks to other co-authors. However, you are the main responsible author for ensuring that these duties are completed correctly. So what about non-author contributors? How do we recognize those who provided valued participation but fell short for the four pillars? Non-author contributors go in the acknowledgement section, and they should be mentioned clearly. This includes those who acquired funding, provided general supervision, offered technical or language editing, or even served as clinical investigators. However, you cannot list people in the acknowledgement section without their knowledge, because being acknowledged implies endorsement of the study's data, and this requires a written permission from these contributors that they agree to be acknowledged. I'd also like to highlight an important ethical issue that we see, especially in global research, which is what we call the parachute science. Parachute science is when researchers from high-income countries conduct studies and extract data from low and middle-income countries without including local researchers with them as authors. And the ICMJE clearly warns that excluding local investigators lessens the fairness of this research. And in fact, lack of inclusion of local investigators as authors is now considered a red flag that may lead to the rejection of the corresponding manuscript. Coming to the rapidly evolving area in research and publishing, which is artificial intelligence. The ICMJE is definitive on this. AI should not be considered an author. And when you think about it, AI fails the fundamental tests of authorship and the pillars of authorship. First, it has no responsibility. It cannot guarantee the accuracy or integrity of its output. Second, it has no legal standing and cannot hold copyright. And finally, AI cannot agree to the integrity pact that we mentioned in criterion number 4. So as we mentioned, the ICJME states that AI cannot be an author. However, AI now is a tool, and it's a fact, and it's permitted to be used, provided that there is mandatory disclosure. Transparency is everything. It can be mentioned, AI use can be mentioned in one of 3 sections in your research. You can state this in your cover letter in the beginning. And if AI was used, for example, for data collection, analysis, generating figures, you should detail this in the method section, which is the second part you can mention AI in. And the third part is if you used it for writing or editing assistance, you also should acknowledge this and disclose it in the acknowledgement section. In all cases, you must specify the exact tool used. For example, if you use ChatGPT, you should mention its version, for example, ChatGPT 4.0 or 5.2. and the specific application used. To summarize, we can look at a hierarchy of research contribution. So the author meets all the four criteria of the ICMJE. They receive full credit and take full accountability. The contributor meets fewer than the four criteria mentioned, is acknowledged with their written permission. The third part is AI usage. It's considered a tool that's strictly technology, and its use must be thoroughly disclosed, and it carries zero responsibility, and all accountability for its output remains with the human authors. So, precision in how we attribute the work is what ensures the long term integrity of scientific research. And thank you for your time.